Welcome to the Magnify podcast. I'm Laurel Day, president of Deseret Book Company. I feel so lucky to be taking the hosting seat today to welcome my friend and special guest, Sharon Eubank. We are inundated with so much great content every day, and sometimes, at least for me, it's hard for something to break through the noise. And I have to say, this conversation was a breakthrough. Sharon redefined a few concepts for me that were paradigm shifting. Big concepts like what it means to be a humanitarian, what a miracle really is, and the power and purpose of our covenants. Many of us first became aware of Sharon Eubank when she served as a former counselor in the Relief Society General Presidency for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Sharon has an incredible view of the world through the work she gets to do in the humanitarian efforts for the church, and she's also a former business owner. Whenever Sharon's name comes up in the circles I am in, it's clear women appreciate her strong example of leadership and her spiritual confidence. And yet she seems to also be the down-to-earth woman you would choose to go to lunch with. And so I hope that's what today perhaps feels like, an intimate lunch with all of us with our new friend, Sharon Eubank. Welcome, Sharon Eubank, to the Magnify podcast. Hello, Sharon.
How are you? Thank you so much. That's an introduction I'm not sure I can live up to, but I hope that we can sit down and just have lunch together. That sounds nice.
I should have sent you lunch just for this interview, but it's just so good to see you. And thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today. We think a lot about our Magnify community, and we know we have women who are listening right now that might be out for a walk. A typical Magnify woman is going to have worries just like we all do, but she's working hard to stay connected to the truths that she knows. She might be in the car taking a child to an activity or even doing laundry around the house, and she also might be in a long commute driving home from work. But this Magnify community of ours tunes in here to get a dose of spirituality and get a spark of momentum for her life. And so with that, Sharon, we would just love to start out with just any little pick-me-up message you might have for our community of these grounded, dedicated women who are dealing with life's challenges like we all are.
Well, first of all, I'm just so thankful for this community. There's so much good that happens just in the lives of ordinary women doing those ordinary things that we all do. People call my office all the time and they tell me, I want to be a humanitarian. And I want to tell them, you already are a humanitarian. The things that you're doing every single day, you don't have to strive to be a humanitarian. You already are one. It sounds maybe crazy, but when it comes down to it, there's only two philosophies in the world. There's the one that, look, I'm going to get what I need. I'm going to prosper according to the management of the creature. I'm going to elbow people out and I'm going to compete to get what I need. And there's the other philosophy that just says, every man, every woman seeking the interest of their neighbor. So when you seek the interest of your neighbor, you're following that Christian, that great, message from Jehovah in the council in heaven. When you do those things that help your neighbors, you're doing the greatest power in the world. You're choosing that side. You're already a humanitarian. And we're already sitting in the branches of the trees that were planted for us by the people who sacrificed in generations before. We're already sitting in those branches. So the fact that we choose that philosophy and we plant those seeds, we grow a tree for somebody else. And that's, I think, the most important thing we can do.
Oh, Sharon, I love that. I confess I'm one of those women who sometimes think it'd be so nice to just be a humanitarian. And I love that. You're right. I mean, it's the work of being human and caring for each other. And in that regard, I love that. Thank you. I've been thinking a lot about the work that I've had the chance to do with women over the years. And I've come to see for myself time and time again that women seem to have this natural desire and instinct to use their influence for good in the home or in the world, to be humanitarians. President Nelson, as you know, recently invited us to go after the one as he prepares to turn 100. I've loved that campaign. And this is, of course, in reference to the Savior's parable to seek the sheep that is lost. And we live in a world with so many needs, so many sheep that are lost. And I'd love to know, in your view, how can women have the best social impact in going after the one?
That's such a good question, because we want to do things, but we don't want to have them be useless or the wrong thing. We want to do the thing that has the great impact. When visitors come to Salt Lake, especially from other countries, if we're hosting an ambassador or somebody, I always like to share the story of the Relief Society women in this valley, because they've They've been persecuted. They've been kicked out because of their religious beliefs. They have crossed 1,000 miles, most of them walking. They get here. There's no humanitarian fund. There's no USAID to help them. Whatever they're going to do with the horrible problems that they have to figure out how to do it themselves. And what they did, I think, is so meaningful because they've got a high infant mortality rate. They don't have any medical care. Eliza R. Snow goes to Brigham Young and she says, look, we need to do something. And he asks her in the way that prophets do, what do you suggest? And she says, we think we should send Relief Society women to medical school. And they're like, I mean, there's nobody in 1868 in the entire United States that thinks that women belong in medical school. There's a huge amount of prejudice, not to mention the Latter-day Saint women, you know, from outside the U.S. But the Relief Society goes door to door. They collect tiny, tiny bits of money from women that they get from selling eggs or from doing laundry. But those women cared about the cause that they were doing and could see the long end. So they donated their money and they sent these 6 women to different medical schools. One went to Chicago, a couple went to Philadelphia. Martha Hughes Cannon was one of them. And when she comes back 5 years later with her newly minted medical degree, she wants to start public health. And there's no interest in public health. She starts training midwives. They open a hospital. If you see a photo of the Deseret Hospital Board of Directors, it's all women. It's like 1875, and there's all these women, and I'm so proud of what they did. But finally, because Martha Hughes Cannon cannot get the territorial legislature to pay attention, she says, fine, I'll run for the legislature. And she runs as a Democrat. She runs against her husband, who was the Republican.
I love that story.
And she wins. And then the first bill that she introduces is about public health. Yeah, the whole reason I tell the story is because they focused on dignity and on root causes. And there's no reason that we can't do that. They trained up other people. They trained 500 midwives. They wouldn't take no for an answer. There's always a way. She was the first female state senator in the United States. She just would not take no. So I think focusing on dignity, focusing on root causes, that's the way to have the impact. And we certainly have the example from our history.
I love that. So thinking more about that, focusing on dignity and the root impact, what are opportunities that you see that maybe we don't see? Like we're just going along, living our lives, and maybe we don't realize the easy ways we could have impact in our communities right now. Are there maybe great needs that are lesser known that we could easily participate in our own areas?
I'm going to give you an answer that you might not like. When I look at what's needed the very most and what people don't know about humanitarian work, it's the ability to ask a question that doesn't have a predetermined answer. And say more about that. Well, we think that people need physical things. And what they really need is the ability to think through the problem that they've got and work through the various solutions. Okay, well, God does this with us all the time in the scriptures. He's constantly asking, what do you want? What is wanted? What do you seek? What will you that I should do for you? The scripture's just full of those questions. If we want to help people, we should sit down and the first thing we should do is ask them, what is it you really want? Because if we don't ask, our empathy takes over and we pick something. I think you need this. And then we start gathering stuff and we produce it. And then we have all these things and we end up giving them the thing that they didn't really ask for, the thing that they didn't really want. And it's out of our empathy. We wanted to, and we thought we picked the thing out of our perspective that they needed, but it was the wrong thing.
Wow. That's a paradigm shift for me. It's interesting because I was going to ask you, I wanted to talk about like what the Savior's invitation to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and visit the imprisoned looks like today. And based on what you just said, I feel like we need a paradigm shift, that it's not the traditional checklist service project kinds of things so many of us grew up doing. So tell me what that looks like in real life. I'm living my life today. What does it look like to seek the need by having a conversation? Is that literally with an individual that I run into on the street? Is it going to an organization that helps people and asking them give me some practical, like, what does that look like?
So I'm going to give you a negative example. I'm going to give you a positive example.
Okay. I love that.
I was just reading over the weekend what happened in the communities during the Sandy Hook shooting tragedy. And this is a small town in Connecticut. It has, I think, the population is like 27,000. And people saw what happened. It was so impactful to them on the news, and they wanted to help. But what they got in Newtown, Connecticut was 65,000 teddy bears, and 1,000 of them were life-size. So they're just huge. And people, they felt like that would help because of the huge mental anguish that was that. But there was so much stuff that got sent to this little town that their postal workers, and they had to get postal workers from other towns to just come manage the stuff. They had an 80,000-foot warehouse that was stacked 8 feet high of stuff. And they were in their grief. What they needed was space to process. And what they were dealing with was all of the things that people had sent. And it was taking up so much of the energy and time. And it's because people didn't ask that question. What is it you really need? And what's the timing for what you really need? Yeah. So there's my negative example. My positive example, it happened in a stake where I used to live in Provo. There was a woman in her 30s, and her husband was killed in an industrial accident. She had 3 kids, and she's just overwhelmed. And, you know, they had the funeral, the Relief Society brought the food, everything else. But now she's just paralyzed with grief. What am I going to do? And the bishop said, what do you want to do? And she said, well, I don't have any education. I quit my education so my husband could go back to school. And she said, what I think I need to do is finish. And so the bishop said, all right, let's see if we could organize, and the board will pay your tuition to finish your degree. But she couldn't take advantage of it. It was this wonderful offer, but I had practical problems. Who's going to make dinner? You know, who's going to get my kids? How are they going to process their grief? And she just couldn't act on the opportunity because she was just so paralyzed. And there was a woman in the stake who came and sat down with her, and she said, what's really going on? What are you most afraid of? And so she just started pouring out her heart. And the woman came back to her a week later, and she said, look, I don't have any money. I don't have money, but I'm retired and I have time. What I'd like to offer you is, for as long as you're in school, I'm going to come. I'm going to get the kids ready for school. I'm going to help them get dressed. I'm going to pack their lunches. I'm going to drive them to school. I'm going to make a meal. I'm going to run your laundry. And then I'm going to wish you guys well. And she did this for 2 years. She did that for that woman for 2 years. And it wasn't the laundry and the food and everything that she did. It was the fact that they had somebody in the house who was just kind of helping them hold everything together. She did that because she sat down and found out, what is it you really need? It's not the bread I'm going to bring you. It's not, what do you really need? And then she responded. And that kind of an example, and it's such an ordinary example, makes all the difference in the world.
I love that, because I think we are naturally really good at showing up and doing something. We're good at showing up with the casserole, right? We're good at showing up with the flowers. We're good in the moment. I think I'm good at showing up. What I forget is 3 weeks later, after the passing of the individual and the person sitting alone. I mean, if you've had somebody in your life that has died that you've loved, you know what that is, that leading up to the funeral, everybody's there and you've got food coming. You can't even eat all the food that is brought to your home. And then 3 or 4 weeks later, when the world is quiet and everybody's gone back to life and you're just there alone. And asking that question of like, what do you actually need? If we could all space out our kindness and our service and our ability to help, what a difference we could make. I've really never thought, I'm embarrassed to say that, but I don't think I ask enough questions. I want to like get in and help where I can right now. And frankly, maybe if I'm being honest, I want to be able to check off that I did something so that I move on to the next thing. And that last example, that's going to stick with me for a long time.
Well, and I have to add to this too. And I'm just like this. You'll ask a question. They'll say, oh, no, I'm fine. Everything is okay. You're going to have to ask 8 or 9 questions to get down to the bottom of it. It's just the way we are. You got to dig a little deeper than everything's okay.
It's so true. So Sharon, as I'm thinking about women, we all have connections to children, whether they're our own or our nieces and nephews or grandchildren. How can we instill a love for humanitarian work in the lives of the children that we love?
Oh, that's such a good question, because the whole thing stops if it doesn't get transmitted to the next generation, so that's a really good question. I guess the thing I want to say is we should take them with us. Rather than talking about it, if we take our kids with us as we do things, I think that that makes any kids with us I have a really vivid memory of being 11 years old, and my dad was a television meteorologist, so he had to work at 9 o'clock. He had to be, on the TV station. But one night I was allowed to go with him to work. It was a big deal. But he said we had to leave a little bit early and we were going to make a little stop. Well, we stopped at a woman's house. She was probably in her 80s. She was a widow. She loved to watch the weather, and she had written my dad a little note, and he had stopped to just visit with her. And I didn't know what was going on. I just sat on the chair. But I remember them talking about Masterpiece Theater. My dad knows nothing about Masterpiece Theater, but it was what she loved. And I've remembered this example for the longest time. Here's a guy who, before he goes to work, stops and visits this widow and talks about Masterpiece Theater and takes his little 11-year-old girl along with him. I've never forgotten that. And I think those early examples of just watching your parents interact with people and do this kind of service, it lays an example, a foundation for us.
Wow. That's a great story. And you're right. We all have memories. I would think we all have memories of like being there when a parent did something.
So what's your memory? What did your parent teach you?
Just while you were talking, I have a memory. My mom would go and play the piano at a care center. And I must have been 4 or 5. And I remember sitting underneath, it was a baby grand piano. And I have a distinct memory of sitting underneath that piano while she played. And then I had never made this connection till this story. In college at BYU, I got a group of people from our singles ward, and we would go to the Provo Care Center on Sundays. And I had never even made that connection, but I'm sure there was something kind of in my DNA that got put in there in those young memories. And you're right, that absolutely had an impact on me. And the question I'm asking myself now is, I don't have children. I have stepchildren with grandchildren though. And these grandchildren, like, I'm grandma. And I think, when was the last time I included them in the kinds of things that I'm trying to do some good in the world? That's such a powerful invitation. We've got to include that next generation.
Take people along. I think more than anything else, more than preaching or reading or stories, it's just letting us experience it together.
Yeah, that's great. Tell me this. Sometimes when I think about the needs, and now that I'm going to think about them a little bit differently, I think it's also very easy to get overwhelmed by all of the needs in the world, even in our communities or in our family. How do we not get overwhelmed by it? Like, how do we see the needs and see the difficulties and see the challenges and just not get completely overwhelmed? Because none of us can do all of it, obviously. And even none of us can do as much as we wish that we could, because there's still life to live, right? How do we avoid getting overwhelmed, or how do you avoid getting overwhelmed with everything that you see?
This is a hard question for me because I'm exposed to a lot of things. I read a lot of news, and it's hard for me not to get overwhelmed, not to have that impact me. It's one of the things that I work on with my own mental balance in my 30-year career. It's just one of the hard things for me. One of the women in my ward who's become my friend, she had a failed back surgery like 12 years ago. And she lives in excruciating pain. She said it's like a full body Charlie horse that never stops. And she's a grandmother, and she knows that she was dying, and she wanted to do something for her kids. She wanted to write these genealogy books for these little grandkids. But she thought, I can't even type for 10 minutes. That's all the energy that I have. And she was telling the Lord, how can I do it? I want to do it. It's the thing I want to do. But I'm just overwhelmed by my physical and my mental anguish. And she said, the Holy Ghost said 2 words in her mind. It said, just try. And she thought, okay. So in 10-minute increments, she could only do it 10 minutes every day. She wrote 23 books. She's showing me the 23 books on her table that she has written in 10-minute increments. And I thought, okay, if I feel overwhelmed, I can do something for 10 minutes. And when you see the results of that, just by trying, it made a huge difference to me.
Oh, I love that. I love the imagery of what we could do in 10 minutes a day. And it's like find the littlest piece that you can do and just do that. Gosh, how many books could we write?
No kidding.
I'm not sure I could write any, but.
And so the thing that I took away from me is I can't take a list of 10. Give me one thing to do today, Heavenly Father, and I'll do it. I'll come back and report to you at the end of the day what it was I did, but just give me one. And if you just do one, you do thousands of things in the course of your lifetime that Heavenly Father wanted done. But it just,
Yeah,
I can handle the one thing.
I love that. Can I ask, I just want to follow up. What do you do when you, in those times when you do feel overwhelmed by all that you see? I can't imagine the experiences that you've had and the things that you've seen. And how do you not just take that in a way that could almost be suffocating? What is it? I'd love to know what you, Sharon Eubank, do for you to like revive yourself so that you can keep doing the good that you do.
To me, it feels like shrapnel. You have these experiences and they kind of get under your skin and you think you're okay. And then all of a sudden it goes off. It goes off, at a later time. I had a mentor in Humanitarian. He was a boss of mine. And he said, you have to take care of yourself. You have to replenish yourself. And I always feel guilty. I always feel guilty about doing something that is replenishing to me. But, to take regular holidays and to spend time with my family and to be out in nature and to follow my hobbies and my passions. Those are just the replenishing things for all of the stuff that I'm giving out. I don't know why I feel guilty about it. There's no reason to feel guilty about that, but I do. It's as if we should go and just give and give and give and give and never take back in. Nothing works that way. Cars don't work that way. People don't work that way. So I try really hard not to feel guilty about the replenishing that I have to do.
Yeah, it is hard. I think it's a challenge for all of us to not feel guilty, but that old oxygen mask adage from the airplane is really true, that if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of our families and we can't take care of the women in our communities and the people that we love. I think that's really true.
Yeah, I don't feel guilty for charging my phone. I don't feel guilty for putting gas in my car. That's just it's the natural law of it. So I don't need to feel guilty about putting that inside myself.
That is a great point. That's a great point. I want to talk for just a minute about this invitation that President Nelson gave us in that classic talk that was in 2015, when he talked about the women that the Lord and the church need, and its connection really to leadership in the lives of women. I think sometimes we think about leadership, somebody like you who's clearly had leadership roles in their work as well as in church service. But in the end, leadership is influence. That's what it is. And President Nelson in 2015 said this: "We need women who know how to make important things happen by their faith and who are courageous defenders of morality and families in a sin-sick world. We need women who are devoted to shepherding God's children along the covenant path toward exaltation. Women who know how to receive personal revelation, who understand the power and peace of the temple endowment. Women who know how to call upon the powers of heaven to protect and strengthen children and families. Women who teach fearlessly." I would love to know what of that invitation that you likely remember as well as the rest of us, but what of those invitations stood out to you, and how do you see ways that women can answer whatever that invitation is that sticks out to you the most?
It's such a rich statement. He's saying so many important things that it's hard to pick one. But when you were reading it, I was just thinking about women who teach fearlessly. There's such a great need in the world for people to stand up for what they feel convictions for, and I think teaching that to other people in a way that they can take in, not in a way that batters them over the head, but in a way that matters. I think Magnified Podcast is kind of part of that. We're talking about the realities of our lives. We're teaching each other, but that we're fearless about. I'm a Christian. I'm a disciple. These are the important things in my life. I don't know if this is the exact right example, but President Nelson was working on his talk, Spiritual Treasures, and he invited the Relief Society Presidency, my Relief Society Presidency, to come over to his office. And, I don't spend a lot of time in his office, but, he opened the door and he was so welcoming, and he sat us down and he had the talk in a binder, and he gave us all pencils, and he said, I really want your feedback on this talk. So,
Wow.
Sister Bingham and Sister Oborfo and I were like, oh, we really love this. And, oh, this is a great point. And he goes, no, that's not what I want you to do. I want you to give me feedback because your perspective is different than mine. So we're going through it. We get to like page 10, and all of a sudden all of our eyes come up and we go, oh, the way you're saying this, it may not come across the way that you mean. There's some like little shards in this that people are going to react against. And he asked us a couple more questions. And so we kept talking about it. And in the end, he said, I don't understand what you're telling me. He said, I don't feel that little sensitivity at all, but I trust you. And then he changed the talk. So when I sat and listened to him give that talk, that phrase of, I don't understand exactly what you're telling me, but I trust you, boy, that was really meaningful to me. And for us to be able to teach fearlessly, I think we have to follow that example. Invite other people to share their perspectives that we may not understand, and then trust them. Trust them for what that is, but make sure that it meshes with our core principles of the Christian faith that we love and we want to teach. But that understanding of each other's points of view is just really important. And I learned that from President Nelson.
Wow, that's an incredible experience. Thank you for sharing that. As you were talking, I hadn't, with all the things that you've been sharing, one of the things as I was reading that quote that stuck out to me was women who understand the power and peace of the temple endowment. And just in a vulnerable moment, real quick, I've been really depleted the last few weeks of like just completely needing to recharge, as you were just talking about. And I found myself last week at the temple, which is, of course, an easy place to go to. I think we think about that. But one of the things that struck me as I was reading that quote is, Laurel, do you understand the power and peace of the temple endowment? Like he used those words. He didn't just say who understand the temple endowment. He said who understand the power and peace of the temple endowment. And for me, I think I could have a conversation with you about understanding the power of the temple endowment. But in all of the things we've been talking about and the need for peace, not just in the world, but in our own personal lives as we're trying to magnify good and do good things in the world. Can you share with me a little bit, Sharon, about your personal perspective of the peace of temple worship, specifically the temple endowment, as President Nelson invited us to do?
I think the temple is one of the few places where we actually talk about a covenantal relationship. So you'll hear apostles talk about this covenantal relationship. So I was asking myself, what is a covenantal relationship? What would make it different? And I think if I can take the example of Jesus, it means that each person in the relationship is willing to sacrifice for the other people and for the sake of the relationship. So when we go into the temple and we make these covenants for ourselves and then for other people, that we're gonna obey commandments that are not easy to obey. We're gonna sacrifice for others. We're gonna consecrate for others. We're gonna have self-discipline. We're gonna be true to our spouse, true to our kids. But those are sacrifices. They're not easy. But when I recognize that when I do those things, when I'm living that kind of life, even though I mess up and I have to, use the atonement of Jesus Christ to repent and keep going, it creates a society of people who are willing to sacrifice for each other. If that's true, then this world it's not some kind of game of roulette that these horrible things are happening and, it doesn't be this time, but it'll be next time. And God's just torturing the world with these terrible things. What it turns out to be then is it's a school, it's an opportunity for us in the middle of terrible things that are happening to each other, that we'll sacrifice our peace, our power for somebody else, because that's what Jesus Christ did for us. If that's true, then we're going to spend our whole eternity doing that. That's what gods do. They sacrifice, they pay with their own blood for the benefit of other people. If I walk out of the temple committed to that, now I've got the reason for why this life is so hard, for why there's so many terrible things happening. God will turn them to our good, but he's using it as a chance for us to help each other. And it's up to us whether we do it or not. But I love that the temple shows me that big vision and then encourages me. When you walk out of this temple, you're committed to do these things. You're in a relationship that sacrifices for other people. And I'm going to sacrifice for you. And that gives me a lot of peace when this world is not a peaceful place.
That is so beautiful, Sharon. It seems to obviously just be an extension of those baptismal covenants that we make, right? To mourn and to bear burdens and to comfort. And I couldn't help but think as you were talking, like, what would happen if we used the temple as that recharge, not just a place to go and find peace for ourselves, but to recharge, to go out into the world and live those covenants in maybe a way that we haven't thought about before.
I think that's true.
Really powerful. Thank you so much. Let's talk a little bit. I'm going to shift a little bit to the idea of miracles. The Magnified community of women, we're gathering this year in several in-person events. And one of the topics and one of the keys is to talk about seeking and expecting miracles. So I would love to hear your thoughts about miracles. And I wonder if there's a story you can share either in your own life or in the work that you've been engaged in that helps highlight the power and reality of miracles in our lives.
This is such a good question. We don't live in an age that really believes in a lot of miracles. And so I think it's a good question. Yesterday, I read a story about my predecessor. So I'm the director of humanitarian services and the very first director of humanitarian services when the church began its effort was a guy named Ike Ferguson. Ike grew up in a farming community. Parents were not religious of any kind. They were good people, but they had just no religion in the home. He's 11 years old, and a woman from the community who's a young mom and a dairy farmer comes to speak to his mother, and he listens from the other room. And then once a week, that woman came and she would teach him a little message. He had a little felt bandello, and she would give him these little things to sew onto that bandello, and she would teach him about stories from the Bible and stories from the Book of Mormon, that she would pray with him. He has no idea what's happening. But at the end of this, it happened for a whole year. He is allowed to graduate from primary without ever going to primary because this woman came to his home. And then he was prepared and he got ordained to be a deacon. So that she did this, in the middle of her farm work, she came to take this little boy. And my friend Ike was just saying, I'm 11 years old. I have no idea that will lead to my ability to be active in the church, to hold the priesthood, to be able to work for the church. And his passion for helping solve the inequities of people through humanitarian service in the world. And he really set the foundation for everything that I'm able to do now in his place. That happened because a woman went to his house and he said, I didn't see that miracle for 30 years. I didn't know, but when I look back in hindsight, I see the miracles. So I guess the point that I'm making with the story is most miracles you don't notice when they're happening to you right in front of you. They just don't, they're so quiet. They just don't seem like it's anything important, but we see them when we look back and we see the miracles that happen in our lives, like what happened with my friend Ike Ferguson. I think that's a true thing about miracles. You have to be willing to look back and then honor the experiences about what happened and call them a miracle. Let the Lord know, I see what you did. I see what you did for me, and I'm willing to acknowledge it.
Well, and what a great perspective, because I think sometimes we think about a miracle has to be like this instantaneous intervention or moment of, oh, I can't explain that. And I love the idea of the miracle being the end of the process. Like, and to your point, we don't know what the Lord is doing for us in our lives. And frankly, we don't know how he's using each of us in each other's lives to maybe create these miracles. I think that if we as women can think more about the long-term game, which you've said a couple of times today, and letting the Lord use us and trusting him and trusting that he trusts us, like President Nelson, that experience with President Nelson. I feel so encouraged right now just having this conversation, because I think I could be doing more good, and it's not going to interrupt the things that I'm already trying to do. Like I don't need to be burdened by that. It's actually, I feel a little excited about the good that I could be doing, which is, I guess, the whole point of a conversation like this. I want to ask you, just kind of as we wrap up, it's the aim of the Magnified community to strengthen women as we live differently and contribute good in this world. And in that light, I would love to know what your hope is for women of the church today.
We were talking about miracles, and I think what you said is true. Miracles we think are going to be some obvious thing that's just unexplainable. And in real reality, the world that we live in is a miracle. The conditions that exist on this world in the ways that they exist, that's a complete miracle. The way our bodies work together and are able to heal and function, I think that's a miracle. I think the act of praying, of actually kneeling down and saying words out loud, and somehow a being light years away from us understands us, feels that, and then sends an answer to us, that's a miracle. But I think when we take them for granted, they don't feel like miracles anymore. And we live in a time that saying there aren't any miracles, and it's kind of disavowing the love that we feel from God our Father. And I think caring for another person more than we care about ourselves, it goes against our biology. It's a true miracle. I think our God is a God of miracles, and he's a God of love. He loves us. So no matter what we've done, no matter what we think we should have done and we didn't do, we can start today to be the miracle in each other's lives, because then that makes us be like God. They don't have to be big things. We just have to have the long view that it's going to make a difference. When we care for each other, when we do things that are against our self-interest and they help other people, when we sit down and ask them, what is it you really need? And I will try to be active and present for you and help you get what you need. Those are miracles every day. And we, as Latter-day Saints and as Christians, I think we need to push back, not by our words, but by our actions. We believe in miracles. We believe in a God of miracles. We believe that they happen every day. They're just quiet and they take a long time to notice. But we are committed to helping people find the miracles in their lives. And we call it ministering, we call it humanitarian work, we call it all these different things. But in the end, it's just doing what we can to help other people with their problems. And I'm committed to that in my life. It's the heart of my Christian faith. And I'm really proud that the Magnify community would engage in such a thing. It encourages me to be shoulder to shoulder with women who believe those same things too.
Sharon, just on a personal note, this conversation has been really rejuvenating for my soul. And I sincerely appreciate who you are and the multitude of things you have done throughout your life to be in the space that you're in now. And I just want to thank you for being a reminder of what a covenant-keeping woman looks like, sounds like. You've helped me feel the Spirit today. And I hope that the women who are listening have been able to participate in this little lunch with us and feel it too, and be encouraged. There's so much easy good we could all be doing. And there's several takeaways for me that have shifted a paradigm for me in this conversation. And I sincerely appreciate who you are and what you've shared with us today. Thank you so much, Sharon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode, and we really hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, we want to tell you about Lift Up Your Heart, a Magnify gathering. It's our event coming this fall, and you can register at magnifythegood.com/events. Lift Up Your Heart is a day-long gathering for Latter-day Saint women meant to remind us of what we already know, that Jesus Christ is our answer and that we're not alone. And here's the best part, there's no decisions to make, no hustle, just come and be strengthened by inspiring speakers, uplifting music, and encouraging conversations. It's a day made for us to gather as women and nourish each other's faith. Lift Up Your Heart is for women ages 16 and up. Bring your mom, bring your daughter, bring your Relief Society sisters, or just bring yourself. We need each other and we need you. And if you're needing a little nudge to reach out to a friend, when you gather a group of 4 or more, you'll save $10 per registration. This year, we're focusing on President Russell M. Nelson's bold invitation to seek and expect miracles, specifically the miracles of joy, courage, peace, faith, and hope that will bring us the strength we need to do hard things. So head to our website at magnifythegood.com/events where you can register now. Thank you so much for being here, and we can't wait to see you.